Part 1. Earth and Dust. The wind scraped across the prairie like a dull blade, carrying with it the taste of drought and desperation. Wyoming territory stretched endless under a brass-colored sky, the kind that pressed down on a man's shoulders until he either broke or learned to carry the weight. Elias Hart had learned. He stood at the edge of his property, watching the horizon shimmer with heat mirages that promised water but delivered only more dust. His small ranch sat stubborn against the landscape. 3 miles outside the town of Dry Mercy, a name that had become more prophecy than place. The last good rain had fallen 2 months back, and since then, the earth had turned mean. "Easy, girl," Elias murmured to his mare, running a calloused hand along her flank. The horse favored her left foreleg, had been doing so for near a week now. He'd wrapped it himself, but his hands weren't made for healing. They were made for other things holding reins, swinging hammers, pulling triggers, things that didn't require the kind of gentleness that fixing broken creatures demanded. The sound of wheels and voices drifted across the flat, and Elias squinted toward town. A wagon train. By the look of it, 5 or 6 prairie schooners raising a cloud of dust that hung in the still air like smoke. Travelers meant news, supplies, sometimes trouble, always meant change, and Dry Mercy had seen enough change lately. None of it good. He led the mare back to the lean-to that served as a stable, gave her water from the dwindling supply in the trough. His own well still produced. Thank the Lord, but barely. Each morning he lowered the bucket deeper, and each morning it came up a little less full. At this rate, he'd be hauling water from town before summer's end, assuming the town wells didn't run dry first. The smell hit him as he entered the house, burnt coffee and loneliness. The particular stench of a widower's keeping. He'd stopped noticing it mostly, the way a man stops noticing his own shadow. But sometimes, like now, with strangers coming to town and the possibility of eyes that might judge, he caught it fresh. Margaret would have had words for him, gentle but firm. She'd have aired the place out, scrubbed the floors with lye soap, made it smell like home instead of penance. But Margaret was 5 years in the ground, along with little Emma, and all the scrubbing in the world wouldn't wash that away. By the time Elias rode into Dry Mercy proper, the wagon train had already drawn a crowd. The travelers had circled up near the public well, and half the town stood gawking like they'd never seen outsiders before, which, to be fair, they hadn't in some weeks. The railroad brought goods and mail regular enough, but flesh-and-blood visitors were becoming scarce as water. Sheriff Hale stood at the edge of the gathering, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, trying to look authoritative. The man meant well, but he had the spine of a grass stalk, and everyone knew it. Still, he kept the peace well enough when peace was what folks wanted kept. "Afternoon, Elias," the sheriff called out. "Come to see the show." "Come to see about supplies," Elias replied, dismounting. Henderson's expecting a shipment of oats, but his eyes were already scanning the newcomers, cataloging faces and intentions out of habit. Most looked like typical frontier pilgrims' families with haunted eyes and patched clothes. Single men with dreams bigger than their competence. A few hired guards trying to look tougher than their years. Then he saw her. She was setting up some kind of medical tent, her movements quick and economical. Mexican or mixed blood, maybe, with black hair twisted up under a practical bonnet. Young, though not a girl late 20s, he'd guess. She wore a gray dress that had seen better days but was clean, and over it a white apron that marked her trade. A doctor, or what passed for one out here. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up. Their eyes met across the dusty space, and something passed between them, not recognition, for they'd never met, but something else. An acknowledgement, maybe, of 2 people who'd learned to work with their hands while others stood around talking. She nodded once, brief and professional, then returned to her task. Elias found himself watching a moment longer before forcing his attention back to the sheriff. "They're planning to stay the night, maybe 2, Hale was saying. "That woman there, She's offering medical services. Doc Morrison's been dead 6 months now. Figured folks might appreciate. A commotion near the well cut him off. One of the wagon guards had collapsed, clutching his side, even from a distance. Elias could see the dark stain spreading across the man's shirt. The crowd pulled back like the blood was contagious. But the woman, the doctor, was already moving. "Get him to the tent," she ordered, her voice carrying authority despite its soft accent. "Quickly now." 2 men lifted the wounded guard, and she led the way. Not running, but not wasting motion either. Professional, Elias thought again. Someone who'd seen blood before and hadn't let it rattle her. "Well," Sheriff Hale said, adjusting his hat. "That's interesting timing." Elias knew what he meant. A man didn't come by a wound like that falling off his horse. That was a bullet wound, maybe a day old, maybe less. The kind of wound a man might get if he tangled with the wrong folks on the prairie, or the right folks, depending on which side of the law you stood. "Best let her work." Elias said, "Man needs help. Whatever else he might need can wait." The sheriff nodded, but Elias could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Dry Mercy had been lucky so far, avoided the worst of the territorial violence. But luck was like water in a drought, you never knew when it might run out. The crowd dispersed slowly, folks returning to their business but keeping one eye on the medical tent. Elias headed for Henderson's store, needing those oats and wanting distance from whatever drama was unfolding. He had enough ghosts without borrowing trouble from strangers. But as he loaded the grain sacks, he found his thoughts returning to the woman doctor, the way she'd moved without hesitation toward trouble, the steadiness in her dark eyes. It had been a long time since he'd noticed such things about anyone, and the feeling sat uneasy in his chest, like trying to breathe at high altitude. The sun was trending toward evening when he finished his business. The medical tent still stood, and he could see shadows moving inside. Whatever had happened to that guard, she was still working on him. That kind of dedication was rare, dangerous too, in a place where helping the wrong person could mark you as wrong yourself. He was leading his mare past the tent when she emerged, wiping her hands on a cloth that had once been white. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the careful way she moved like her back hurt. But her hands were steady as she wrung out the cloth. "He'll live," the question came out before Elias could stop it. She looked up, recognizing him from earlier. "If infection doesn't take him, if he rests, if God wills it." A slight smile touched her lips, tired but genuine. "Many ifs in frontier medicine. Many ifs in frontier everything," Elias replied. "True enough." She gestured to his mare. "She's favoring that leg." "Weak now. Wrapped it best I could." "May I?" She moved toward the horse without waiting for an answer, running gentle hands down the affected leg. The mare, who usually shied from strangers, stood quiet under her touch. "It's not broken," she said after a moment. "But the wrapping's too tight. You're cutting off the blood flow." She looked up at him. "I could rewrap it properly. My supplies are for people, but the principle's the same." Elias hesitated. Taking help from strangers went against his grain, but the mare needed better than he could give, and pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. "I'd be obliged," he said finally. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing." She was already working, unwinding his clumsy wrapping with practiced movements. "Consider it professional curiosity. I haven't worked on a horse in months." As she worked, he noticed the blood on her apron, not the fresh red of recent work, but older stains that had set into the fabric. This wasn't her first wounded stranger, nor likely her last. When she pulled out a roll of clean bandage, he saw how she measured it carefully, not wasting an inch. Resources were precious to a traveling doctor. Everything had to be rationed, saved, reused. There. She stepped back, and the mare tested the leg, already looking easier. "Keep it clean and dry. In a week, she should be sound." "Thank you, Miss." Vasquez, Maria Vasquez. The name came smooth, but something flickered in her eyes. Not quite a lie, but not quite the whole truth either. Elias Hart. Got a place 3 miles east. If you need anything, supplies. Water. That's kind of you, Mr. Hart. She was already turning back to her tent. The conversation clearly ended. But we'll be moving on soon enough. As he led the mare away, Elias caught sight of a figure watching from the shadows between buildings. Colt Mallory, wearing his usual expensive coat despite the heat. That smile that never quite reached his eyes. The man had a way of appearing wherever something interesting was happening, like a buzzard drawn to dying things. Mallory touched his hat brim in mock greeting, then strolled toward the medical tent with the easy confidence of a man who owned things, or thought he did. Elias had seen his type before, men who confused fear with respect, who built kingdoms on sand and called them eternal. The woman, Maria Vasquez, if that was her real name, would need to be careful. Colt Mallory collected debts the way other men collected scalps, and he had a particular interest in anyone who might upset the careful balance he'd constructed in Dry Mercy. A traveling doctor who helped strangers without asking questions first. That was the kind of wild card Mallory wouldn't tolerate for long. But that wasn't Elias's problem. He had oats to store and a ranch to run. Whatever drama was about to unfold, he wanted no part of it. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's trouble only led to your own multiplying. Still, as he rode home through the gathering dusk, he found himself thinking about steady hands and tired eyes, about the way she'd helped without being asked, expecting nothing in return. It had been a long time since he'd met someone who gave more than they took. The stars were coming out by the time he reached his ranch. He tended the mare, gave her extra oats in celebration of her improving leg. Inside, the empty house waited with its familiar shadows and silences. But tonight, something felt different. Not better. Exactly, just different. He made coffee, burnt it as usual, and sat on the porch watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere to the west, coyotes sang their ancient songs. The wind had died with the sun, leaving the kind of stillness that made a man think too much. 5 years was a long time to live with ghosts. Maybe it was time to start living with something else. But even as the thought formed, he pushed it away. Hope was more dangerous than any wounded stranger or calculating town boss. Hope made you careless, made you forget the lessons written in scar tissue and gravestone. He'd help if needed, because that's what Margaret would have wanted. But he wouldn't hope. Not again. Some wells, once dry, never produced water again no matter how deep you dug. In town, a light still burned in the medical tent. And in the shadows, other figures moved with purposes of their own. The night was full of possibilities, most of them dark. But that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, Elias Hart sat with his bitter coffee and his carefully tended distance, while the prairie held its breath and waited for whatever storm was building on the horizon. Part 2. The well speaks truth. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when the shouting started. Elias heard it from his porch, carried on the still air like smoke from a distant fire. He'd been mending harness leather, letting his hands work while his mind wandered. But the sound brought him to his feet. Town trouble usually stayed in town, but lately the boundaries had been blurring. By the time he reached Dry Mercy, a crowd had gathered around the public well. The woman doctor, Maria Vasquez, stood at its center, her medical bag clutched in one hand, chin raised despite the hostility surrounding her. A bucket lay overturned at her feet, its precious water already disappearing into the thirsty earth. "Harboring criminals is what she's doing." Abel Crawford's voice cut through the morning air. The man owned the largest surviving ranch in the area, which gave him a voice louder than most. "That wounded fellow didn't get shot by accident. She's nursing outlaws back to health." "I treat whoever needs treatment," Maria replied, her accent thickening slightly under stress. "That's what doctors do." "Not in my town." Crawford spat. "We got enough troubles without importing more." Elias tied his mare to the hitching post and pushed through the crowd. Sheriff Hale stood at the edge, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. When he saw Elias, relief flickered across his face. "Elias, maybe you can talk sense here." "What's the problem, Sheriff?" Hale gestured helplessly. "Miss Vasquez came to draw water. Crawford and some others figure she shouldn't, on account of her helping the wrong sort," Crawford finished. "That guard she patched up word is he tangled with the railroad guards 2 days back. She's aiding thieves." "You have proof of that?" Elias asked mildly. Crawford's face darkened. "Don't need proof when it's plain as day. Strange woman shows up, starts doctoring without asking questions. Next thing you know, we'll have every outlaw in the territory camping on our doorstep." The crowd murmured agreement. Fear did that to people, made them see enemies in shadows and salvation in cruelty. Elias had watched it happen before, in other towns, other times. It never ended well. "The man she treated," Elias said, loud enough for all to hear. "Is he still here?" "Rode out before dawn," someone called, soon as he could sit a horse. "So he's gone. No harm done." Elias looked at Crawford. "Unless you count denying water to a woman who's done nothing but offer help. You taking her side?" "Heart." Crawford's hand drifted toward his hip, where a Colt .45 rested, not quite a threat, but close enough. "I'm taking the side of common decency." Elias kept his own hands visible and still. "Lady needs water. Wells are for everyone." "Public wells are for citizens," Crawford countered. "Not for Mexican." "Enough." The voice came from behind, smooth as oil on water. Colt Mallory strolled through the crowd like he owned it, which in many ways he did. His coat was pristine despite the dust, his smile bright as a new penny. "Surely we can resolve this without disturbing the entire town." Crawford stepped back, suddenly uncertain. Mallory had that effect on people, made them remember debts owed and favors needed. "Miss Vasquez," Mallory continued, tipping his hat. "I apologize for this misunderstanding. Dry Mercy prides itself on hospitality." He shot Crawford a look that could have frozen whiskey. "Doesn't it, Abel?" "Course," Crawford muttered, though his eyes stayed hard. "Just being careful is all." "Careful is wise." Mallory's smile never wavered. "But so is Christian charity. Please, Miss Vasquez, take what water you need. In fact," he turned to the crowd, "I hereby pledge to fund a new well, specifically for travelers and those passing through. No resident of Dry Mercy should have to share with strangers if it troubles them so." The crowd stirred. Unsure whether this was generosity or insult, Mallory had a gift for gestures that cut both ways. "That's not necessary," Maria said quietly. "I can draw water elsewhere." "Nonsense." Mallory's voice brooked no argument. "You're a doctor. This town needs a doctor. What kind of place would we be if we couldn't spare water for healing hands?" He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward to work the well. Maria watched warily as her bucket was filled, and Elias could see her cataloging exits, measuring threats. Smart woman. Mallory's gifts always came with interest attached. "There now," Mallory said as the full bucket was handed over. "And might I add, I'd be honored to discuss a more permanent arrangement. The town's been without proper medical care since poor Doc Morrison passed. Perhaps we could convince you to extend your stay." "I go where I'm needed," Maria replied carefully. "And you're needed here." Mallory's smile sharpened. "I insist you consider it. In fact, I have a business proposition that might interest you. The old Morrison place sits empty. It could be converted to a proper clinic. I'd finance it myself, naturally." The crowd was warming to this idea. Free medical care, funded by Mallory's deep pockets. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Elias had lived in Dry Mercy long enough to know that Mallory's charity was just another form of ownership. Think on it, Mallory said when Maria didn't respond. I'll call on you later to discuss details. He touched his hat again and strode away, taking most of the crowd's hostility with him. But not all. Crawford lingered, along with a handful of others, the kind of men who nursed grudges like some men nursed whiskey. This ain't over, Crawford said low enough that only those nearest could hear. Mallory won't always be around to play savior. That a threat? Elias asked. Just an observation. Crawford spat in the dust near Maria's feet, then turned and walked away. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Elias, Maria, and Sheriff Hale standing in the sudden quiet. The sheriff looked between them, opened his mouth as if to say something, then thought better of it and wandered off to do whatever it was sheriffs did when they were avoiding responsibility. You shouldn't have intervened, Maria said, hefting the bucket. Water sloshed over the rim, precious drops lost to the dust. I can handle myself. I'm sure you can. Elias took the bucket from her without asking, noting how she'd been favoring her left shoulder. But handling yourself and handling a mob are different things. They walked toward the wagon camp in silence. Around them, Dry Mercy was waking up properly, shops opening, horses being led to the smithy, the normal business of a town trying to pretend everything was fine. Your shoulders hurt, Elias observed. It's nothing. Same nothing that had you working past midnight on that wounded man. She gave him a sharp look. You were watching? Saw the light. This town doesn't have many doctors who work that late. He paused. Or at all. They reached her tent, and he set the bucket down carefully. The morning sun was climbing, promising another scorching day. Already, heat mirages shimmered on the horizon. Why did you really help? Maria asked suddenly. Men like Crawford, they don't forget. You've made an enemy. Already had plenty of those. Elias shrugged. One more won't matter. And Mallory, you trust his generosity about as much as I'd trust a rattlesnake's kiss. He met her eyes. You'd do well to remember that. His offers come with chains, even if you can't see them right off. She studied him for a moment, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he meant to show. You speak from experience. This town's full of experience, most of it hard-won. He touched his hat. You need more water. My well's 3 miles east. No crowds, no questions. Why would you offer that? The question hung between them like dust in sunlight. Elias could have given her the easy answer, Christian charity, neighborly duty, basic human decency, all true enough. But there was something in her direct gaze that demanded honesty. Because I've been where you are, he said finally. Different circumstances, but the same spot. Knowing you did right but catching hell for it anyway. He turned to go, then looked back. That invitation stands. Water's scarce, but not so scarce we can't share. He was untying his mare when she called after him. Mr. Hart, that man I treated, he wasn't a railroad thief. Elias paused. No. He was shot trying to stop one. The real thieves left him for dead. She smiled grimly. But that's not a story anyone wants to hear. Is it easier to blame the stranger, the one who looks different? You have proof. He was carrying a railroad detective's badge. Showed me before he left. She shook her head. But what's proof against Fear Crawford and his kind? They see what they want to see. Elias mounted his horse, thinking, a railroad detective, shot by actual thieves. That changed things, though he wasn't sure how yet. You tell Mallory. Would it matter he has his own version of truth? Smart woman indeed. Watch yourself. Miss Vasquez, this town's got more secrets than graves, and some folks prefer keeping both buried. He rode back to his ranch with her words echoing in his mind. The real thieves left him for dead, if that was true. It meant the outlaws were still out there, maybe closer than anyone thought. And if Mallory was offering protection to a doctor who'd helped a railroad detective, the pieces didn't fit. Not yet. But Elias had learned to pay attention when things didn't add up. In his experience, the math usually balanced in the end, and someone always paid the difference. At home, he found unexpected visitors. Ruth Morrison, old Ruthie, as the town called her, sat on his porch like she owned it, which, in a way, she did. The woman had been in Dry Mercy since before it had a name, had outlived 2 husbands and more hardships than most folks could imagine. Her boarding house was the closest thing to neutral ground the town possessed. With her was Nora Quinn, newer to town but no less formidable. The woman made her living carving gravestones, which gave her a perspective on life that most folks found unsettling. She had opinions and wasn't shy about sharing them. "Ladies," Elias said, dismounting, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't play dumb, Elias Hart," Ruthie said. "Half the town's talking about your performance at the well this morning." "Wasn't a performance." "Course not." Ruthie's eyes twinkled with something between amusement and warning. "Just like it wasn't a performance when you stood up to the Carlson boys last year, or when you backed Sheriff Hale against those drifters." "Man's got a habit of finding trouble," Nora added, "or trouble finding him." Elias led his mare to the stable, the women following. "There's a point to this visit." "The point," Ruthie said, "is that Colt Mallory's taken an interest in that doctor woman. And when Mallory takes an interest, people tend to end up beholden or buried." "Sometimes both," Nora added cheerfully. "She seems capable of taking care of herself." "So did Doc Morrison," Ruthie said quietly. "Right up until his accident." Elias stopped. Doc Morrison fell from his horse. In broad daylight, on a road he'd traveled for 20 years, stone sober. Ruthie's face was grim now. Right after he refused to patch up some of Mallory's boys who'd been shot up, said he wouldn't aid criminals. "You're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Ruthie cut him off. "I'm just observing that this town's been without a doctor for 6 months, and now one appears just when Mallory needs one. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Elias finished tending his horse in silence, thinking. If Ruthie was right, and she usually was, then Maria Vasquez had walked into something bigger than she knew. Or maybe she knew exactly what she was walking into. Either way, it was trouble. "Why tell me?" he asked finally. "Because you're one of the few men in this town Mallory doesn't own," Nora said. "And because that woman's going to need friends. Real ones, not the kind that come with strings attached." "I'm not looking to be anyone's friend." "No," Ruthie agreed, standing to leave. "You're looking to be left alone with your ghosts. How's that working out for you?" After they left, Elias sat on his porch, watching the heat build over the prairie. The day stretched ahead, full of chores and solitude, but his mind kept returning to the morning's events, to Crawford's threats and Mallory's smile, to a woman who worked through the night to save a stranger. He thought about the railroad detective, shot by thieves and left for dead, about Doc Morrison's convenient accident, about wells and water and who decided who was worthy of either. Change was coming to Dry Mercy. He could feel it in the air, like the pressure drop before a storm. The question was whether it would wash the place clean or drown it entirely. Elias went inside and checked his rifle, cleaned and oiled it with the care of long habit. He wasn't looking for trouble. But experience had taught him that not looking for it and not preparing for it were 2 different things. Somewhere in town, Maria Vasquez was probably tending to whoever needed tending, unaware of the currents pulling her deeper into Dry Mercy's web. Or maybe she was aware. Maybe that's why she'd come. Either way, Elias thought, tomorrow was shaping up to be interesting. And in Dry Mercy, interesting was rarely good. Part 3 tracks at Red Gulch. The young Crow Scout appeared at Elias's ranch like a ghost from the prairie grass, materializing in that way his people had that made white folks nervous. But Elias had learned to read the difference between stealth and threat, and Little Crow, as the town called him, carried himself with the easy confidence of someone with nothing to hide. "Mr. Hart," the young man said, dismounting from his paint pony. His English was perfect, mission school precise. "I need to show you something." Elias set down the fence post he'd been setting. 3 days had passed since the incident at the well. 3 days of unusual quiet that felt like the pause before lightning strikes. What kind of something? The kind that explains why that railroad detective got himself shot. Little Crow's dark eyes were serious. The kind that maybe tells us why Miss Vasquez really came to Dry Mercy. Within an hour, they were riding toward Red Gulch, Maria Vasquez between them on a borrowed mount. Elias had found her at the abandoned Morrison place, cataloging what could be salvaged for a makeshift clinic. When Little Crow had mentioned the blood trail he'd found, she'd insisted on coming. "This detective," she said as they rode. "He told me he'd been tracking the gang for weeks. Said they had inside information about railroad shipments." "Inside information means inside man," Elias observed. "That's what he believed. Someone in town, someone trusted." Little Crow led them off the main trail, following markers only he could see. The land rose gradually, red rock replacing prairie grass, the gulch carving through the landscape like an old wound. This was ancient ground, worn by wind and time into shapes that caught the eye and troubled the mind. "There," Little Crow pointed to dark stains on the sandstone. 3 days old, maybe 4. Your detective bled plenty before he found help." They dismounted, and Maria examined the blood trail with professional interest. "He lost too much. It's a miracle he survived long enough to reach town." "Or determination." Elias said, "Man with a mission can surprise you." They followed the trail deeper into the gulch, the walls rising around them like cemetery gates. The air was cooler here, trapped between stone, and their footsteps echoed oddly. Little Crow moved ahead, reading sign, while Elias kept watch behind, old habits. "Here." The scout stopped at a cluster of boulders. "He hid here for a time, and look," he pointed to marks in the dust. "Many horses, shod horses, not Indian ponies." Elias knelt, studying the tracks. 8, maybe 10 riders, moving weight. He looked up at Little Crow. They were hauling something. "This way?" They followed the tracks around a bend, and suddenly the gulch opened into a hidden box canyon. What they found there made them all stop short. "Mother of God!" Maria whispered. The camp was abandoned, but recently used. Empty crates marked with railroad stamps were stacked against one wall. Bedrolls, fire pits. Enough sign to show this was no temporary hideout. This was a base of operations. But it was the other supplies that caught Elias's attention. Bags of grain marked for the Indian Agency. Medical supplies with government stamps. Even what looked like Army surplus blankets. "This isn't just railroad theft," he said slowly. "They're stealing relief supplies." "Supplies meant for the reservation," Little Crow added, his voice tight with controlled anger. "My mother's people have been waiting for these goods. Children going hungry while someone profits." Maria was examining the medical supplies, her face grave. "These medicines, they're what I've been asking for. What the town needs." She looked up at Elias. "Mallory promised to get medical supplies, said he had connections." The pieces were falling together in an ugly pattern. Elias walked the camp perimeter, noting details. A horseshoe with a distinctive nick he'd seen that mark before. In town, a scrap of paper caught in the rocks, torn from what might be a telegram. "We need to leave," he said suddenly. "Now." "But the evidence." "We'll be here tomorrow. Right now, we're exposed in a box canyon with one way out." His hand moved to his rifle. "Mount up." They were halfway back to the gulch entrance when Elias heard the whisper of sand that meant movement above. He grabbed Maria's reins, pulling her horse against the rock wall just as the first shot cracked across the canyon. "Ride!" he shouted, but it was too late. More shots came from the rim, kicking up dust, driving them back into the shelter of an overhang. Little Crow had his rifle out, returning fire, but they were pinned. Elias counted muzzle flashes, 4 shooters, maybe 5, spread along the rim. Professional placement. These weren't panicked thieves. This was an ambush. "Can you shoot?" he asked Maria. I took an oath to do no harm, she replied, but her hands were steady as she checked the small pistol in her bag. Oath won't stop bullets, Elias said. He squeezed off 2 shots, saw one of the shooters jerk back. Little Crow, how's our back door? No back door, the scout replied. But there's a game trail, halfway up. Might could reach the rim if they're busy looking this way. Go, circle behind them. The young man nodded and disappeared into the rocks like smoke. Elias kept firing, drawing attention, making the shooters focus on him and Maria. The doctor pressed against the rock beside him, and he could feel her trembling not with fear, but with the controlled tension of someone holding themselves ready. Who are they? She asked between shots. Does it matter? Everything matters if we die here. He glanced at her, saw determination mixed with something else. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. You know something. Later, she said, and fired her pistol at a shadow moving above. The firefight stretched minutes into hours, or seemed to. Then suddenly, shooting from above, but different now, Little Crow had reached the rim. The ambushers' fire slackened, confused, and Elias grabbed Maria's hand. Now, run! They broke from cover, spurring their horses hard down the gulch. Shots followed, but scattered now, disorganized. Elias felt something tug at his shirt, heard Maria gasp, but they kept riding. Behind them, the gunfire intensified. Little Crow keeping the ambushers busy, buying them time. They didn't stop until they reached the open prairie, their horses lathered and blowing. Elias turned, scanning their back trail. Rifle ready, but no one followed. Not yet. You're hurt, Maria said. He looked down, saw blood on his sleeve. Just a graze, the kind of wound that stung like hell but wouldn't slow him down. I've had worse. Now let me... After we put distance between us and them. He looked at her hard. Now tell me what you know. She met his gaze steadily. That telegram scrap you found, I saw one like it before. The detective had it, railroad code for shipment schedules. And it was signed CRM. He thought it meant Charles Morrison, the station master, but CM could just as easily be Colt Mallory. Elias felt the last piece click into place. He's not just protecting the thieves, he's running them. Thunder rumbled overhead, though the sky was clear. Elias looked up, saw clouds building with unnatural speed to the north. The air pressure was dropping fast, that peculiar heaviness that meant serious weather coming. Storm, he said. We need shelter. But as they rode, Maria swaying in her saddle from exhaustion or something worse. Elias's mind kept working. Mallory stealing relief supplies, selling them back to the very people they were meant for, using his position in town to cover his tracks, eliminate threats like Doc Morrison, and now trying to eliminate them. The first fat raindrops hit as they reached a line of cottonwoods along a dry creek bed. Elias helped Maria down, noting how she favored her right side. You were hit. It's nothing, she said, but when he pulled her jacket aside, he saw the blood. Nothing doesn't bleed like that. He got his medical kit from his saddlebags, crude compared to her supplies. But it would have to do. Sit, doctor's orders. She almost smiled at that. You're not a doctor. And you're not just a traveling physician. He cleaned the wound, a deep graze along her ribs. Painful, but not dangerous if kept clean. Are you? The storm broke in earnest then, turning the dry creek into a torrent within minutes. They huddled under the partial shelter of the cottonwoods. Horses turned away from the driving rain. In the strange intimacy of the storm, Maria finally spoke. My name is Marisol Vega. I am a doctor, but I came here for another reason. She winced as he tied the bandage. My brother, Mateo, he wrote me about opportunities in Dry Mercy, about a man who was helping Mexican workers find good jobs, sending money home. Mallory. Yes, but Mateo's letters stopped 2 months ago. When that detective found me on the trail, dying, he told me something. Said he'd seen my brother with Mallory's gang. Said Mateo was in trouble. Elias finished the bandage, sat back. The rain drummed on the leaves above, a sound like 1,000 fingers tapping. So, you came to find him. To save him. If I can. He's young, foolish, but not bad. Not a thief. She looked at him through the gray curtain of rain. I took an oath to heal, but I'd break it to save my brother. It was the kind of honesty that deserved honesty in return. My wife and daughter died in a fire 5 years ago. The words came easier than expected. Maybe because of the storm, the strange shelter it provided. Vigilantes burned out what they claimed was a rustler's camp, except it wasn't. It was a family traveling to California. Margaret and Emma were bringing them food when... He stopped. Some things didn't need saying. The smell of smoke still woke him sometimes, sent him stumbling outside, gasping for air. "I'm sorry," Marisol said simply. The men who did it were never caught. Some say Mallory helped them disappear. Fresh starts for the right price. He met her eyes. That's who you're dealing with. A man who trades in misery and calls it business. Then we stop him. Elias shook his head. I help you get clear of this. You find your brother and run far as you can. And the medical supplies? The stolen food meant for hungry families, the town living under his thumb. Her eyes flashed. You'd let that continue? It's not my fight. Whose fight is it? Then Sheriff Hale's, he's too frightened. The townspeople, they're too divided. Someone has to stand up. And get buried for their trouble. Maybe. But at least they'd be buried doing right. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. I need to find Little Crow. Make sure he's safe. Elias caught her arm as she stumbled. He's Apache trained and knows this land like his own breath. He's safer than we are. He felt her trembling, realized it wasn't all from the wound. When's the last time you ate? Yesterday, maybe. Doctors make terrible patients, he muttered, getting dried beef and hardtack from his pack. Eat, then we figure out next moves. They sat in companionable silence, watching the storm rage. The creek was running strong now, red with washed soil, like blood, Elias thought, the land bleeding out its secrets. There's something else, Marisol said eventually. That night I treated the detective. Someone else came to my tent, late, after midnight. A woman. Elias waited. She was young, frightened, said she worked at the saloon, said she'd overheard Mallory planning something big, one last score before the army increases patrols. She looked at him. She mentioned your name, said you were the only one who might stop it. Why would she think that? Because you stood up to the Carlson gang. Because you can't be bought. Because... She hesitated. Because Mallory's afraid of you. She heard him say so. It wasn't fear. Elias knew. It was caution. Mallory understood that every kingdom needed an enemy to justify its existence. Elias had been useful in that role, the bitter widower who caused just enough trouble to make Mallory look reasonable by comparison. But if Mallory was planning something big enough to worry his own people... The woman, he said. What else did she say? That innocent people would die. That it would happen soon? Within the week. Marisol pulled something from her pocket, a scrap of paper, water-stained but readable. She gave me this, said it was proof. Elias read it, felt his blood chill. It was a list of names, families traveling the railroad, their valuables, their routes, and at the bottom, a date. 3 days from now. This isn't just theft, he said slowly. It's a massacre in the making. These families, they're all Mexican, Chinese, freed slaves heading west. People no one will miss, Marisol said bitterly. People the law won't work too hard to avenge. The storm was passing, the rain slackening to drizzle. Elias stood, decision crystallizing. He'd spent 5 years trying to stay out of other people's troubles. 5 years letting the world go to hell while he nursed his wounds. Maybe Ruthie was right. Maybe it was time to stop living with ghosts. "Can you ride?" he asked. "If I must." "Then we get back to town, quietly. I know some people who need to hear about this." He looked at her. "But understand, once we start this, there's no stopping. Mallory won't just let us walk away." "I knew that when I came here," Marisol said. "The question is, Mr. Hart, what made you change your mind?" He thought about it as they prepared to ride. About Margaret, who'd died trying to help strangers. About Emma, who'd never gotten the chance to grow up in a better world. About all the things he'd let slide because fighting seemed too hard, too dangerous, too likely to end in more loss. "Maybe," he said finally, "I'm tired of living in a world where men like Mallory decide who deserves water and who doesn't." They rode back through the settling dusk, the storm-washed air clean and sharp. Behind them, Red Gulch kept its secrets. Ahead, Dry Mercy waited, a town balanced on the edge of change. And somewhere in the growing dark, Little Crow moved like a shadow, carrying the word of what they'd found. The game was changing. The only question now was who would survive the final hand. Part 4. Words spoken in lead. The morning after the storm, Colt Mallory came calling at Elias's ranch. He arrived with just 2 men, a calculated show of confidence rather than force. His bay stallion picked its way across the muddy yard like it was too fine for common dirt. "Hart," Mallory said, "not dismounting. Heard you had some excitement yesterday out near Red Gulch." Elias continued mending the corral fence. Didn't look up. "Lots of excitement in these parts lately." "Indeed." Mallory's voice carried that particular tone of a man used to being heard. "Which is why I've come with a proposition. The town needs men like you. Hart, men who understand how things work." "Thought I already understood. You run things. Everyone else falls in line." Mallory chuckled. "Such a simple view of complex matters. I provide stability, protection. Without me, this town would tear itself apart within a month." "Or thrive." Elias finally looked up. "Hard to know when nobody's tried it." "You think me a villain?" Mallory leaned forward in his saddle. "I built the new school. I keep the peace. When the Hopkins family lost their barn to lightning, who provided the lumber to rebuild? The same man who charges them double for grain because he controls the supply." Mallory's smile thinned. "Business is business, but I'm offering you something different. Partnership. Help me maintain order, and you'll never worry about water rights again. That aquifer under your land, I know men who could help you tap it properly. Irrigation for your fields. Surplus to sell." It was a good offer, the kind that would have tempted Elias 5 years ago, before he learned the price of looking away. And in return, simple. Stop stirring up trouble with that Mexican doctor. She's causing unrest, making people question things better left unexamined. Mallory's eyes were cold despite his smile. "I'd hate to see her meet with an accident, like poor Doc Morrison." There it was, the threat wrapped in concern, the iron fist in the velvet glove. Elias set down his hammer carefully. "That sounds like a confession." "It sounds like friendly advice." Mallory straightened. "The offer stands until sunset. After that..." He shrugged. "Well, this territory can be dangerous for those who stand alone." After they left, Elias saddled his mare and rode for town. The streets were busy with midday commerce, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Groups of men stood in tight clusters, voices low. Women hurried their children along, eyes downcast. He found Sheriff Hale at the jail, feet up on his desk, studying a week-old newspaper like it held the secrets of the universe. "Mallory just threatened me," Elias said without preamble. "Offered partnership or promised accidents. Might want to write that down." Hale didn't look up. "You got witnesses?" "Just his 2 men." "Then you got nothing." The sheriff finally met his eyes, and Elias saw Not cowardice, but exhaustion. You know how many complaints I get about Mallory, how many times someone swears they'll testify, then disappears or changes their mind. So you do nothing? I enforce the law. When there's evidence, when there's witnesses willing to stand up in court. Hale's laugh was bitter. Find me either of those things, Hart, and I'll arrest the devil himself. Elias left the jail frustrated but not surprised. The law was only as strong as the men willing to enforce it. And Sheriff Hale had learned the hard lesson of frontier survival. Sometimes staying neutral was the only way to stay alive. He found Marisol at the Morrison place, which she'd transformed into something resembling a clinic. The main room was scrubbed clean. Makeshift beds lined against one wall. The smell of carbolic fought with prairie dust. She was tending to a child with fever, her movements gentle despite her own obvious pain. The boy's mother hovered nearby, torn between gratitude and the suspicion that came from generations of being told people like Marisol were different, less than dangerous. Mrs. Garrett, Marisol said without looking up, your son needs rest and clean water. The fever should break by morning. We can't pay, the woman said quietly. Not until harvest. Did I ask for payment? Marisol's voice was mild but firm. Health isn't a luxury. Not while I'm here. Mrs. Garrett's face crumpled with relief. She clutched Marisol's hand briefly, then gathered her son and left. Only then did Marisol acknowledge Elias. You shouldn't be here, she said. It associates you with me. Already associated? Mallory made that clear. He told her about the morning's visit, watched her face tighten. He's moving faster than expected, she said. Something spooked him. Little Crow made it back. He's been spreading word about what we found. Quietly, but word spreads. Elias moved to the window, checking the street. There's going to be a town meeting tonight about the water rights situation. Let me guess. Mallory's idea. He wants to consolidate control, make his unofficial position official. Elias turned back to her. It's also when he'll move against you. Public accusation. Probably force the town to choose sides. Then I should leave. You could, but what about your brother? What about the families on that list? Marisol was quiet for a moment, organizing medical supplies with hands that shook slightly. I received another visitor last night, after midnight. Elias waited. A young man, Mexican. He was frightened, kept looking over his shoulder. She met his eyes. It was Mateo, my brother. Where is he now? Gone. He wouldn't stay. Said it was too dangerous, but he told me things. She moved closer, lowered her voice. Mallory's planning to hit the westbound train 3 nights from now, the one carrying those families. But it's not just robbery. He plans to blame it on Indians, use it to justify clearing the remaining bands from the territory. Start a war to cover his crimes. Elias felt sick. How many innocents die in that scenario? All of them. Eventually. Marisol's voice was hard. Mateo's trapped. Mallory has evidence of a crime my brother didn't commit but can't disprove. If he runs, Mallory sends bounty hunters. If he stays, he becomes complicit in massacre. Elias understood the trap. It was elegant in its cruelty. We need allies, people willing to stand up at that meeting. Who Crawford wants me gone. The merchants fear Mallory's economic power. The good people keep their heads down and hope trouble passes. She laughed bitterly. It's just you and me, Mr. Hart, a bitter widower and a Mexican doctor, against the man who owns the town. Not just us, a voice said from the doorway. Old Ruthie entered, followed by Nora Quinn and, surprisingly, Little Crow. You'd be amazed who's willing to stand when someone else stands first. Mallory's pushed too hard. Nora added, the Garrett boy that was just here 3rd child this week sick from bad water. Water from Mallory's new well. He's been cutting it with alkali runoff, Little Crow said. saving the good water to sell at premium. My people noticed weeks ago, but who listens to Indians? So we have evidence of poisoning the water supply. Elias said slowly. That's enough for the sheriff? Would be, if half the town wasn't already bought, Ruthie said. But there's more. Tell them what you told me, boy. Little Crow stepped forward. I followed those tracks from Red Gulch, led straight to the old Barnett place. Mallory's men are using it as a way station. I counted 20 horses, supplies for a long ride. He paused. And cases of army rifles, new ones. He's arming for war, Elias said. This isn't just about one train. It's about controlling the territory. Marisol added. Create enough chaos, blame the right people, and suddenly everyone needs Mallory's protection. They spent the afternoon planning, each taking tasks. Ruthie would talk to the women, the real power in any frontier town. Nora would work on the merchants, remind them that graveyards were bad for business. Little Crow would gather what young men he could trust. And Elias would do what he'd avoided for 5 years. He'd stand up in public and tell the truth. The meeting convened at sunset in the town hall, a grand name for a building that served as church, school, and courthouse, depending on the day. Nearly everyone in Dry Mercy crowded inside, the air thick with tobacco smoke and tension. Mallory sat at the front, flanked by his men. He'd dressed for the occasion, black suit, silver watch chain, the picture of respectable prosperity. Sheriff Hale sat to one side, studying his hands. Friends. Mallory began, his voice carrying easily. We face troubled times. Water grows scarce. Lawlessness increases, and certain elements seek to divide us. His eyes found Marisol in the crowd. I propose we formalize what has worked informally. Create a town council with authority to manage resources and maintain order. With you as head, naturally. Someone called out. Mallory smiled. I've served this town well, I believe, but I'm open to other nominations. I nominate Elias Hart, old Ruthie said loudly. The room stirred. Mallory's smile flickered but held. Mr. Hart has many qualities, but leadership requires more than... He paused delicately. Personal grievances. Like what? Nora Quinn stood. Business sense, like selling poisoned water to children. That's a serious accusation, Miss Quinn. It's a serious crime. Elias stood, feeling the weight of every eye. The alkali content in your new well is 3 times safe levels. You knew it and sold it anyway. Prove it. Little Crow stepped forward with a glass jar. Water sample, tested this morning. Any miner can confirm the contamination? Mallory's men shifted, hands moving to weapons. But the crowd was stirring now, angry voices rising. That's not all. Elias continued. We found your cache at Red Gulch, the stolen relief supplies meant for the reservation, medical supplies that should have gone to this town. More baseless accusations. I have the shipping manifests, Marisol said, producing papers. Provided by someone in your organization who's grown tired of the killing. For the first time, Mallory's composure cracked. His eyes scanned the room, looking for the traitor. They lingered on several faces, each flinch catalogued for later. Even if these wild claims were true, he said, voice hardening. Who here has the courage to do anything about it? You need me. Without my protection, my connections, this town dies. It's dying anyway, Mrs. Garrett said, surprising everyone. Poisoned water, stolen medicine, fear in the streets. What kind of life is that for our children? The only kind available, Mallory snapped, unless you prefer the chaos that... The door slammed open. A young Mexican man stumbled in, bloody and gasping. Mateo Vega, Elias realized. Marisol started forward, but Elias caught her arm, held her back. They're coming, Mateo gasped. Mallory's men, they know about the train. They're going to... A gunshot from outside cut him off. Then everything happened at once. Mallory's men drew weapons. Women screamed. Men dove for cover. Sheriff Hale stood frozen, torn between duty and survival. The windows exploded in a shower of glass as more shots poured in from outside. "Everyone down!" Elias shouted, pulling Marisol behind an overturned bench, the air filled with gun smoke and panic. But something unexpected happened. The townspeople didn't scatter. Maybe it was anger finally boiling over. Or maybe it was the sight of Mateo bleeding on their floor. But they fought back. Crawford, of all people, tackled one of Mallory's men. Nora Quinn threw an inkwell that caught another in the temple. And Sheriff Hale finally remembered why he'd put on the badge in the first place. His gun cleared leather and pointed at Mallory. "That's enough, everyone, stand down." The shooting stopped, though the tension remained electric. Mallory stood amid the chaos, his perfect suit dusty, his control shattered. "You fools," he said quietly. "You have no idea what you've done." "We've taken our town back," Elias said, standing slowly. "That's what we've done." Mallory's laugh was ugly. "Your town, this dust bowl. You're welcome to it, but mark me when the real storm comes, when you're begging for protection. Remember this moment." He looked at his men. "We're leaving. Anyone who wants to survive what's coming better saddle up now." They filed out, maybe half of Mallory's men following. The others, seeing which way the wind blew, dropped their weapons. Sheriff Hale, hands shaking but voice steady, began taking them into custody. Marisol knelt beside her brother, working quickly to stop the bleeding. "He needs a real doctor," she said, then caught herself. "He needs a hospital." "He'll get one," Elias said. "We'll make sure of it." The immediate danger passed. The town began to realize what they'd done. They'd stood up to Mallory, driven him out. But now what? Who would protect them? Who would manage the water, the supplies, the 100 details that kept a town alive? "We will," old Ruthie said, as if reading minds. "All of us, the way it should have been from the start." But Elias, watching Mallory's dust disappear into the darkness, knew it wasn't over. Men like that didn't just fade away. They came back, usually when you least expected it. And there was still the matter of the train, the families marked for slaughter. Mallory might be gone from Dry Mercy, but his plans were bigger than one town. "Get your brother stable," he told Marisol quietly. "Then we need to talk, all of us, because driving Mallory out was just the first step." She nodded, understanding. The real fight was still coming, and this time, they'd have to meet it head-on, without the false protection of a strong man's rule. Outside, the stars were coming out over Dry Mercy. For the first time in years, they seemed to shine a little brighter. Or maybe that was just hope, dangerous and necessary, flickering back to life in the darkness. Part 5. Her skirt rode up as he grabbed her. The sky above Red Gulch was the color of old brass when they spotted the smoke. Not the lazy drift of campfires, but the angry black columns that meant trouble. Elias pulled up sharp on the ridge, raising his hand to halt the others. "Forest fire?" Sheriff Hale asked, squinting through the heat shimmer. "Wrong season," Little Crow said. "And look at the pattern. That's tactical burning. Someone's trying to flush out prey." They'd ridden hard for 2 days, following Mallory's trail. The bastard had been smart, splitting his forces, laying false tracks, but Mateo, patched up and desperate to make amends, had finally given them the real location, a box canyon deeper in Red Gulch, where Mallory planned to regroup before hitting the train. Now it seemed Mallory had problems of his own. "Rival gang," Marisol suggested. Steadying her mount, she'd insisted on coming despite her injuries, and Elias had learned not to argue with that particular set to her jaw. "Or the law finally caught up," Hale said hopefully. He'd been trying to prove himself since the town meeting, wearing his badge like it meant something again. Little Crow dismounted, studying the ground. "Many horses, moving fast, careless." He looked up, They're running from something. A distant crack of gunfire decided them. Elias checked his Winchester, met Marisol's eyes. We go in careful. Whatever's happening down there, we're not part of it yet. They picked their way down into the gulch, the air growing thick with smoke. The sandstone walls seemed to trap the heat, turning the narrow passage into an oven. Elias's shirt stuck to his back, and he could hear Marisol's labored breathing behind him. Then they rounded a bend and found chaos. The box canyon was a battlefield. Mallory's gang was pinned against the far wall, exchanging fire with attackers hidden in the rocks above. Bodies lay scattered in the open ground, some moving, most not. And in the center of it all, flames were spreading through the scrub brush with frightening speed. "Dry lightning must have started it," Little Crow said. "Storm 2 days back. The fighting's just making it worse." "Who's attacking them?" Hale asked. Elias studied the tactical positions. "Railroad detectives, maybe, or bounty hunters." He pointed to the rim. "They've got Mallory boxed in good, but that fire's going to kill everyone if it spreads." "Including the prisoners," Marisol said sharply. That's when Aurelius saw them, a group of civilians huddled behind some boulders near Mallory's position. Mexicans mostly, some Chinese, a few black families. The people from the list. Mallory had already taken them from somewhere, was probably holding them for the main event. "Those are the families from the train manifest," Marisol confirmed. "If they die here, Mallory still wins. He'll blame whoever's attacking him." "Not if we can help it." Elias was already moving. "Sheriff, you and Little Crow circle left. Try to reach those rocks. Get the civilians out if you can." Marisol. "I go where you go," she said firmly. "Those people need medical help." He wanted to argue, but knew it was useless. And truthfully, he'd rather have her where he could see her. "Then we go straight through. Use the smoke for cover." They left their horses and went on foot, staying low. The smoke burned their eyes and lungs, but it hid them from both sides. Gunfire cracked overhead. Bullets whining off stone. Elias could hear shouting now, Mallory's voice rising above the rest, trying to rally his men. They were halfway across when the wind shifted. Suddenly, they were exposed, caught in the open as the smoke cleared. One of Mallory's men spotted them, swung his rifle around. Elias pushed Marisol down, brought his Winchester up, but knew he'd be too late. The shot came from above. The outlaw spun and fell. On the rim, Elias caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. The railroad detective Marisol had saved, back on his feet and returning the favor. "Move!" Elias grabbed Marisol's hand and they ran, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. They reached the relative safety of the boulders where the civilians cowered, children crying, adults praying in 3 languages. "We're here to help," Marisol said in Spanish, then repeated it in English. "Stay low. We're getting you out." An old Chinese woman clutched at her. "My grandson, he breathed no good. The smoke." Marisol was already moving, checking the boy. "Asthma attack. He needs clean air." She looked at Elias. "We have to move them now." But the fire was spreading faster, jumping from bush to bush. The heat was becoming unbearable, and the smoke was thickening again. Worse, Elias could hear the crackle of flames behind them. The fire had circled around somehow, cutting off their retreat. "We're trapped," someone moaned. Not yet. Elias remembered something from his soldiering days. Little Crow mentioned an underground stream in this canyon. Has to come out somewhere. He started searching the rock wall, running his hands over the stone. There, a coolness, a hint of moisture. "Here, help me move these rocks." They worked frantically, men and women together, as the fire closed in. The shooting had mostly stopped now, both sides more concerned with the flames than each other. Elias saw Mallory trying to lead his remaining men up a narrow trail, only to be driven back by the fire. The rocks gave way suddenly, revealing a narrow opening. Water trickled out. Not much, but enough to show the passage went deeper. "It's too small," someone protested. It'll widen inside, Elias hoped. Women and children first, Marisol. Lead them through. What about you? Someone needs to make sure everyone gets in. He was already lifting the first child to the opening. Go. She looked like she wanted to argue, then nodded. As she turned to enter the passage, her skirt caught on a jagged rock. She stumbled, started to fall backward toward the advancing flames. Her skirt rode up as he grabbed her, his arms enfolded her, trembling with fierce, tender devotion. For a moment they were pressed together, her back against his chest, his arms tight around her waist. He could feel her heart racing, or maybe that was his own. The smoke and chaos faded away, leaving just the two of them, holding onto each other like drowning souls finding solid ground. Elias, she whispered. I've got you. His voice was rough with smoke and something else. I won't let go. I know. She turned in his arms, met his eyes. I know. A burning branch crashed down nearby, breaking the spell. She squeezed his hand once, then disappeared into the passage. Elias turned back to help the others, lifting children, supporting the elderly, all while the fire pressed closer. Sheriff Hale and Little Crow appeared through the smoke, hurting more civilians. That's all we could find, Hale gasped. Where's... Through here. Hurry. They worked with desperate efficiency, pushing people into the narrow opening. The heat was overwhelming now, the air itself seeming to burn. Elias's eyes streamed tears. His lungs screamed for clean air. That's the last of them, Little Crow said. Now us. You first. Elias ordered. He could hear Mallory's men screaming somewhere in the smoke, trapped by their own greed. Part of him thought they deserved it. The better part knew no one deserved a burn. Can't save everyone. Heart, Hale said, reading his mind. Come on. They squeezed into the passage just as the fire reached their position. The stone was cool against Elias's scorched skin, the trickle of water a blessing. Behind them, he could hear the roar of flames consuming everything in the canyon. The passage did widen, opening into a series of connected chambers. The civilians huddled together, coughing and crying, but alive. Marisol moved among them with her medical bag, treating burns and smoke inhalation with their meager supplies. There's light ahead, someone called. Another opening. They emerged on the far side of the ridge, stumbling into clean air like survivors from another world. Behind them, Red Gulch was an inferno, black smoke rising in a column that could probably be seen for 50 miles. Elias did a quick count. They'd saved 23 people, including 6 children. Not everyone from the list, but more than would have survived without intervention. Mallory, Sheriff Hale asked. Little Crow shook his head. No one could have survived that, not trapped where they were. Elias wasn't so sure. Men like Mallory had a way of surviving when better people didn't. But for now, the immediate threat was over. These people need shelter, Marisol said, appearing at his elbow. There was soot on her face, a burn on her hand he'd have to ask about later. And medical care, and food. Dry Mercy's closest, Hale said. 2 days' ride, but we can make it. Will the town take them in? One of the Mexican men asked bitterly. Or will they turn us away like everywhere else? They'll take you, Ellis said firmly. Things are changing in Dry Mercy. You'll be safe there. He hoped it was true. The town had stood up to Mallory, but old prejudices died hard. Still, crisis had a way of bringing out either the best or worst in people. He had to believe it would be the former. They made camp as far from the burning gulch as they could manage. Little Crow and some of the men went to find the horses, hopefully scattered but alive. Elias helped Marisol set up a makeshift medical station, holding blankets for privacy while she treated the worst injuries. You saved us, the Chinese grandmother said, clutching his hand. You and the lady doctor. We owe you our lives. You owe us nothing, Elias replied. Just live them well. Later. As the stars came out and the rescued families settled into exhausted sleep, Elias found himself sitting beside Marisol at the edge of camp. She'd finally stopped moving, stopped helping, and he could see the toll the day had taken. "Your hand," he said, pointing to the burn. "It's nothing." But she let him apply salve and wrap it gently. "Just another scar for the collection." "You have many—" "Inside and out." She leaned against him slightly, perhaps unconsciously. "You." "Same." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the distant glow of the still-burning gulch. Finally, Marisol spoke. "What you did today, risking everything for strangers." "What we did," he corrected. "Your wife would be proud." The words should have stung, but they didn't. For the first time in 5 years, thinking of Margaret brought warmth instead of pain. "She would have liked you." A Mexican doctor who brings trouble wherever she goes. A woman who does what's right regardless of the cost. He paused. "And you don't bring trouble. You bring truth. Sometimes they look the same." She turned to look at him, and in the starlight he could see something shifting in her expression. "That moment, in the cave entrance, when I caught you." "When you held me." Her voice was soft but steady. "I haven't felt safe like that, and I can't remember when." "Marisol, I know. Too much has happened. Too much is still happening. But I wanted you to know." She stood, touched his shoulder briefly. "Thank you, Elia, for catching me in all the ways that matter." She walked back to check on her patients, leaving him alone with the stars and the distant smoke and the memory of holding her, trembling with fierce, tender devotion. It wasn't love. Not yet. They were both too scarred, too careful for that. But it was a beginning, and on the frontier, sometimes a beginning was all you could ask for. Tomorrow they'd start the journey back to Dry Mercy with their rescued souls. There'd be challenges finding homes for the families, dealing with any of Mallory's men who'd escaped, rebuilding a town without its strongman. But tonight, Elias' heart sat under the Wyoming stars and felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Hope. It burned small but steady, like a candle in a window. And for now, that was enough. Part 6, Fire and Confession. The ashes of Red Gulch were still warm when they found the evidence. Little Crow had gone back at first light with 2 of the Mexican men, scouting for any survivors or salvageable supplies. What they discovered instead would change everything. Railroad strongbox. Little Crow announced, setting the scorched metal container on the makeshift table in Dry Mercy's town hall. Found it where Mallory made his last stand. Sheriff Hale pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, barely singed, were papers shipping manifests, telegraph copies, and, most damning, correspondence between Mallory and various officials. Names, dates, bribes paid and received. Mother of God. Ruthie breathed, reading over Hale's shoulder. Senator Morrison, Judge Kellerman, even the territorial governor's aide. Mallory owned half the territory. Owned, Elias corrected. Past tense. You sure about that? Crawford stood in the doorway, his face grim. Fire don't mean he's dead. We didn't find his body. Found 7 others, Little Crow said. All Mallory's men, but you're right, no sign of Mallory himself. The town hall was packed, residents mingling uneasily with the rescued families. The integration hadn't been smooth, old prejudices surfaced quickly, but Marisol's clinic had become neutral ground. Sick children didn't care about their nurse's accent, and grateful parents remembered who'd helped when no one else would. Whether he's dead or alive, Sheriff Hale said, holding up the papers. We have enough here to destroy his network. This goes to the federal marshals today. If it gets there, Nora Quinn observed. Mallory's people could be watching the roads, the telegraph lines. Then we make sure. Elias stood. I'll ride with you, Sheriff. Little Crow, too. Anyone wants to stop us will have to work for it. And leave the town undefended. Crawford's question carried weight. Without Mallory's iron control, old feuds were already resurfacing. 2 fights had broken out at the saloon, and someone had poisoned Jake Garrett's well, though whether from malice or stupidity, no one knew. "I'll stay," Marisol said from the back of the room. "The clinic needs me, and the families need protection." "From what?" Crawford turned on her. "You brought this trouble. Maybe if you leave." "She saved 23 lives." Elias cut in, his voice cold. "What did you do while children were burning?" "Crawford, hide behind your ranch gates." Crawford flushed. "I'm just saying what others think. Mallory's gone, but the problems ain't. Water's still scarce, supplies still short, and now we got 24 more mouths to feed." "Those mouths belong to human beings," old Ruthie said sharply. "Or has this town forgotten basic Christian charity?" The meeting devolved into arguments, voices rising. Elias caught Marisol's eye, saw her exhaustion. She'd been working nonstop since their return, treating burns, smoke inhalation, and the everyday injuries of a frightened population. "Enough!" Sheriff Hale's rarely used authority voice cut through the noise. "We're better than this. We stood together against Mallory. We can stand together now." He looked around the room. "I'm calling for volunteers. Town Watch, to keep the peace. Water Committee, to ensure fair distribution. Housing Committee, for the new families." "And who leads these committees?" someone called. "You. Sheriff, you couldn't stand up to Mallory for years." Hale's face tightened, but he nodded. "Fair point. That's why I'm also calling for new elections. Mayor, sheriff, town council. Let the people decide who leads." The room stirred. Dry Mercy had never had real elections. Mallory had appointed positions, or they'd gone to whoever could hold them. Democracy was a foreign concept. "I nominate Elias Hart for mayor," Ruthie said immediately. "I decline," Elias said just as fast. "But I'll stand for the Water Committee. That's where I can help most." Other nominations flew. Some surprising Nora Quinn for town council. Little Crow for the Peace Committee, despite laws saying Indians couldn't hold office. The mood shifted from anger to something like hope. That night, Elias found Marisol at the cemetery. She stood before a row of fresh graves, those who hadn't survived the fire or the journey back. Her medical bag sat beside her, and he realized she'd been here since the meeting ended. "You can't save everyone," he said gently. "I know," her voice was hollow. "But I can't stop trying." He stood beside her, sharing the silence. The graves were simple, no money for proper stones yet, but Nora had promised to carve markers for free when she could. "The Lou boy died asking for his mother," Marisol said suddenly. "She'd already gone. The smoke took her first, but I held his hand and pretended." She turned to him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "Is that mercy or cruelty? Lying to a dying child?" "It's human." Elias wanted to comfort her but didn't know how. "You gave him peace at the end. That matters." "Does it? Mallory's still out there. Those papers prove he was planning worse, not just one train, but a whole campaign. Drive out the undesirables, claim their land, sell to Eastern investors." She laughed bitterly. "We saved 23 people. He planned to murder hundreds. But he didn't. We stopped him." "You stopped him? She gestured helplessly. "I patch wounds. I don't prevent them. You do more than that." Elias touched her shoulder carefully. "You show people what's possible. Crawford's granddaughter has fever. Guess who he asked for not Doc Morrison's memory? You. Because I'm the only choice. Because you're good at what you do. And because people are starting to see past their fear." He paused. "Your brother wants to talk to you. He's at Ruthie's." Marisol stiffened. "I can't. Not yet. He chose Mallory. Chose money over... He chose survival. Like we all do. Until someone shows us there's another way." Elias met her eyes. "You showed me." Before she could respond, they heard horses, many horses, moving fast. Elias's hand went to his gun as riders appeared on the main road, a dozen men, badges glinting in the moonlight. Federal marshals. The lead rider, a weathered man with skeptical eyes, dismounted at the cemetery gate, looking for Sheriff Hale. Heard there was trouble requiring federal attention. "You heard right," Elias said, "but you're either very fast or—" "We were already coming," the marshal interrupted. "Got word 2 weeks ago about railroad interference in these parts. The fire just moved up our timeline." He looked at the fresh graves. "We too late to help?" "For them, yes," Marisol said, "but not for justice." They gathered again at the town hall, where Sheriff Hale presented the evidence. The federal marshal Thompson. He'd introduced himself as examined each document carefully. "This is bigger than we thought," he admitted. "Senator Morrison alone. This could reach Washington." He looked up. "You said Mallory might have survived." "Nobody," Elias confirmed. "But that canyon was an inferno." "In my experience, men like Mallory don't burn easy." Thompson stood. "We'll post men here. Help keep order while you sort yourselves out. But I need witnesses, people willing to testify in federal court." "You'll have them," Marisol said. "Starting with my brother. He knows where the bodies are buried literally." "And you, ma'am, you treated the railroad detective who started this investigation." "I did." "Then we'll need your testimony too. In fact—" Thompson studied her. "We've been looking for a territorial medical examiner, someone to document crimes, establish causes of death. Interested?" Marisol blinked. That's not what I do." "It's exactly what you do, just with legal authority behind it." Thompson smiled slightly. "Pays regular, too. Might help with that clinic you're building." Elias saw her wavering. It would mean staying, putting down roots. It would also mean confronting the worst of humanity, over and over. "Think about it." Thompson said, "We're not leaving for a few days." The meeting broke up, but the town didn't sleep. Lights burned in windows as people talked, planned, worried. The future, uncertain but their own, stretched before them. Elias was heading home when he heard the commotion. Crawford's ranch hands had cornered one of the Chinese families in an alley. Accusations flew: stolen chickens, poisoned water, the usual fears dressed as grievances. "Stand down," Elias ordered, stepping between them. "Not your business, Hart," one ranch hand snarled. "Chinawoman was seen near our well." "I was walking to the clinic," the woman protested. "My daughter needs medicine." "Sure you were. Just like that Mexican doctor was just helping when she brought hell to our town." "The only hell in this town is what we make ourselves," Elias said. "Now back off." They faced off, tension crackling. Then Little Crow appeared, along with 2 federal marshals. The ranch hands calculated odds and retreated, muttering threats. "This isn't over," Crawford called from the shadows. "You can't protect them all forever." After the family was safely away, Elias found himself walking with Little Crow. The young scout seemed troubled. "Something you need to say?" Elias asked. "That marshal, Thompson, I've seen him before, during the Sand Creek aftermath." Little Crow's voice was carefully neutral. "He was one of the officers who investigated, found no wrongdoing." Elias felt cold. Sand Creek, where peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho were slaughtered by Colorado militia. If Thompson had covered that up. "You think he's corrupt?" "I think he follows orders. Right now, those orders align with justice. Tomorrow." Little Crow shrugged. "Federal attention's like medicine, helpful in small doses, poison in large. Then we'd better make sure Dry Mercy can stand on its own." They parted ways, but Elias couldn't shake the unease. They'd traded Mallory's certain corruption for the federal government's uncertain justice. Was it really an improvement? He found his answer at the clinic. Marisol was teaching Mrs. Garrett and 2 Mexican women basic nursing skills. The Chinese grandmother was grinding herbs with mortar and pestle. Children of 3 races played together in the corner, their parents' prejudices not yet learned. "It's starting to work," Marisol said, noticing him. "Slowly, but it's starting. And the federal offer—" She was quiet for a moment. "If I take it, I stay. This becomes home." "Is that so bad?" "Home hasn't been kind to me, or to you." She looked at him directly. "Could you stand it, watching me ride out to examine bodies? Document violence. It's not the healing I dreamed of." "Dreams change," Elias said. "Mine did. Wanted to farm, raise a family, grow old peaceful. Now," he gestured at the integrated clinic, "now I want to build something that lasts. Something Mallory couldn't corrupt or Crawford can't tear down. Together." The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. "If you'll have me," he said simply. "Not as, I know we're not." He stopped, frustrated by his own tongue-tied words. "I know what you mean," Marisol said softly. "And yes, together. Whatever that becomes." A knock interrupted Thompson with final papers. The evidence was catalogued, witnesses scheduled. The machinery of justice, imperfect but grinding forward, was in motion. "Found something else interesting," Thompson said, producing a telegram. Colt Mallory's body was identified 50 miles south, trying to board a train to Mexico. He didn't make it. "How?" Elias asked. "Shot while resisting arrest, according to the report." Thompson's smile was thin. "Though between us, I suspect someone wanted to ensure he didn't testify. His network's cleaning house. So Mallory was dead, but his legacy lived on in the corruption he'd fostered. It would take years to root out, if ever." "Ma'am," Thompson turned to Marisol. "About that position." She looked at Elias, then around the clinic at the women learning to heal, the children playing together, the slow foundations of something new. "I'll take it," she said, "but I stay based here. Dry Mercy's my home now." Thompson nodded, satisfied. "We'll make it official tomorrow. Welcome to federal service, Dr. Vega." After he left, Elias and Marisol stood in the doorway, watching the town settle into uneasy sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, elections, integration, the slow work of building trust. "No more secrets," Marisol said suddenly. "That's what I want, a town where truth isn't dangerous." "That's a big dream." "Worth trying for. Worth everything," Elias confirmed. In the distance, a coyote howled not the mournful sound of before, but something almost like celebration. The desert was claiming back its own, washing clean the blood and ashes. And in Dry Mercy, 2 damaged souls stood together, planning a future neither had imagined but both now dared to hope for. Part 7 water flows through the stone. The railroad company men arrived like buzzards to carrion, their black suits stark against Dry Mercy's dusty streets. 3 days after Marshal Thompson's departure, they descended with ledgers and lawyers, ready to clean up the mess Mallory had left behind or bury it, depending on which served their interests better. Elias watched them from his porch, noting how they avoided the immigrant side of town where the rescued families had settled. The morning sun caught on his coffee cup, the same bitter brew, but somehow it tasted different these days. Less like penance, more like preparation. Mr. Hart. The lead attorney, a thin man named Pemberton, approached with calculated deference. "I represent the Union Pacific Railroad. We understand you were instrumental in exposing the recent irregularities." "That's one word for theft and attempted murder," Elias replied. Pemberton's smile was practiced. "Indeed, which is why we're prepared to offer substantial rewards for information leading to the recovery of stolen property And, of course, compensation for any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. Elias set down his cup. Is that what you call leaving families to burn? The railroad had no knowledge of Mr. Mallory's excessive methods. We merely contracted for security services. Pemberton produced a leather folder. However, in the interest of community relations, we're prepared to offer settlements, provided, naturally, that all parties agree to certain discretions. You mean silence. I mean moving forward productively. Elias stood, towering over the smaller man. The only thing I'm interested in is water rights. The railroad's been damming upstream, starving out homesteaders. That ends, or Marshal Thompson hears about every irregularity we've found. Pemberton's composure cracked slightly. That's hardly reasonable. Neither is dying of thirst. You have 1 week to propose new water agreements, fair ones, or we let the federal boys sort through Mallory's papers more carefully. Elias smiled. Amazing what a man keeps records of when he thinks he's untouchable. After the lawyer scurried away, Elias rode to town. The place was transforming daily. The old Mallory Mercantile had become a cooperative, run jointly by townspeople and the new arrivals. Languages mixed freely: English, Spanish, Mandarin. Crow creating a frontier pigeon of commerce and cautious friendship. He found Marisol at the clinic, now officially the Territorial Medical Examination Office, though she insisted on keeping the simple Dry Mercy Clinic sign old Ruthie had painted. She was training her assistants in wound cleaning when Sheriff Hale interrupted. Got a problem. Hale announced, the Garrett boy's gone missing. Crawford's organizing a search party, and he's got some of the ranch hands worked up, saying the Mexican families are involved. Based on what? Marisol demanded. Based on hate and convenience. Hale looked tired. The election was tomorrow, and the strain of actual leadership was showing. I need help keeping this from turning ugly. Where's Crawford now? Elias asked. Gathering men at his ranch, planning to search the immigrant camp first. Marisol was already grabbing her medical bag. If they find that boy hurt and blame, they won't. Elias caught her arm. Because we'll find him first. Little Crow's the best tracker in the territory. Where is he? Teaching the Chinese kids to fish at Willow Creek, someone volunteered. Within an hour, a proper search was organized. Little Crow took the lead, reading sign with careful attention. The trail led not toward the immigrant camp, but out into the Badlands, toward the old mine shafts everyone knew to avoid. Boy's been exploring. Little Crow concluded, following rabbit tracks, looks like got turned around. They found young Timothy Garrett as the sun peaked, trapped in a shallow shaft with a twisted ankle. The boy was scared but unharmed, babbling about following a white rabbit like in his mother's storybook. Interesting thing, Little Crow said quietly to Elias as they rigged a rope. Found other tracks near here, fresh ones. Someone's been using these shafts. Mallory's leftover men. Maybe, or newcomers. Either way, worth watching. They brought the boy back to find Crawford's mob facing off with a group of Mexican and Chinese families who'd armed themselves with farm tools. Sheriff Hale stood between them, looking overwhelmed. Found him, Elias called out, lifting the boy from his saddle. Fell down a mine shaft chasing rabbits. The tension broke as Mrs. Garrett rushed forward, tears streaming. But Crawford wasn't ready to let go of his anger. Still say we need to watch these people, he growled. Boy could have been let out there. By who? Marisol challenged, checking Timothy's ankle. The imaginary rabbit? Or maybe you'd prefer to blame the Chinese grandmother who's been teaching your wife to preserve vegetables. Crawford colored. His wife had indeed been learning from Mrs. Liu, though he'd forbidden it. Small rebellions were happening all over town as practical needs overcame old prejudices. This has to stop, old Ruthie announced, her voice carrying the authority of years. Tomorrow we vote. New leadership, new rules. But if we tear each other apart before then, what's the point? The crowd dispersed slowly, anger giving way to embarrassment. Elias helped Marisol back to the clinic, where she treated Timothy's ankle with gentle efficiency. "It's not going to be easy," she said quietly. "Even with elections, even with the new laws, people's hearts change slower than their circumstances." "But they do change," Elias pointed out. "Look at us." She smiled at that, the expression transforming her tired face. "True, though we're both too stubborn to have much choice." That evening, they walked together to the cemetery. It had become their ritual, checking on the graves, bringing water for the few flowers people had planted. The Chinese families had added incense burners, the Mexican families crosses. It was becoming a place of shared grief rather than segregated sorrow. "Mateo came by today," Marisol said suddenly, "while you were searching." Elias waited. The subject of her brother was still delicate. "He wants to work for Marshal Thompson, provide information about the remaining gang members." She sighed. "It's dangerous, but it's also redemption. For him." "What did you tell him?" "To follow his conscience, but carefully." She knelt by a small grave, straightening a wind-blown flower. "He's all the family I have left, but I can't protect him from his own choices." "You have other family now," Elias said softly, "if you want it." She looked up at him, something shifting in her expression. "Elias Hart, is that a proposal?" He felt heat rise in his face. Not yet, unless—" Her laugh cut off his stammering. "Relax, I'm not ready either. But someday, when we are—" She stood, touched his hand. "I'd like that. Family." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Tomorrow would bring elections, changes, new challenges. But tonight, there was peace. The next morning, Dry Mercy voted. It wasn't pretty arguments at the polling place, challenges to voter eligibility, Crawford's last-minute attempt to exclude non-citizens. But when the dust settled, the results spoke clear. Sheriff Hale, re-elected by a slim margin, his recent courage outweighing years of weakness. Ruthie Morrison, first woman elected to town council, to no one's surprise. And in the shock of the day, Little Crow won a seat on the water committee, despite laws that said he couldn't. Federal territory. The election judge Nora Quinn ruled when challenged. Federal law supersedes local custom. Man can vote, man can serve. Crawford stormed out, but his support was eroding. Too many people had benefited from the changes: medical care, fair water distribution, cooperative purchasing that broke the monopolistic pricing. Pragmatism was defeating prejudice, slowly but surely. That night, the town celebrated. Musicians from 3 cultures played in the street, their different styles somehow harmonizing. Children ran between dancing adults, skin colors mattering less than who was it in their games. Elias found himself on the clinic porch with Marisol, watching the festivities. She'd changed from her work clothes into something prettier, a blue dress that caught the lantern light. "You clean up nice, Dr. Vega," he observed. "You're not so bad yourself, Committeeman Hart," she smiled. "Dance with me." "I don't really." "Neither do I. We'll learn." They joined the crowd, moving awkwardly at first, then finding a rhythm. Around them, the town danced former enemies, new neighbors, old friends. It wasn't perfect. Some stood apart, nursing grievances. Others danced with wariness, testing new boundaries. But they danced. "Look," Marisol whispered, nodding toward the edge of the crowd. Crawford's wife was teaching Mrs. Lou to waltz, their husbands nowhere in sight. Small rebellions indeed. The music slowed, and Elias pulled Marisol closer. She rested her head against his chest, and he felt the last of his defensive walls crumble. 5 years of armor, dissolved by the simple act of holding someone who'd chosen to stay. "I love you," he said quietly. the words surprising him with their certainty. She looked up, eyes bright. "I love you too, despite your terrible coffee and stubborn ways." "Because of them, maybe." She smiled. "Though the coffee really is awful." They laughed, drawing looks from other dancers. Let them look, Elias thought. Let them see that healing was possible, that hearts could learn new rhythms. The celebration lasted past midnight, but eventually the town settled. Elias walked Marisol home to the small rooms behind the clinic she'd claimed as her own. At the door, they lingered, neither ready for the evening to end. "The railroad will come back," Marisol said. "Crawford won't give up. There are still Mallory loyalists out there." "I know," Elias touched her face gently. "But we're not the same people we were. The town's not the same. We're stronger now. Together." Together. She kissed him then, soft and sure, a promise of tomorrows they'd face side by side. When they parted, both were breathless. "Good night, Elias." "Good night, Marisol." He walked home under stars that seemed unusually bright, past the courthouse where new laws would be written, past the cooperative where old monopolies had broken, past the cemetery where grief was shared regardless of origin. At his ranch, he found an unexpected gift, a young aspen sapling, roots wrapped in burlap, leaning against his door. The note was in Little Crow's careful hand. For new beginnings. Elias smiled. Carrying the tree inside, tomorrow he'd plant it by the well, where its roots could find water and its leaves could offer shade, a living thing in a place that had known too much death. In town, Marisol stood at her window, watching the last lanterns go dark, somewhere in the night. Her brother was riding dangerous trails, seeking redemption. Somewhere else. Timothy Garrett slept safe in his bed, ankle bandaged by immigrant hands his grandfather feared. Changes, small and large, rippling outward like water through stone. Slow, patient, but inexorable. The territorial medical examiner of Dry Mercy smiled and prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, bodies to examine, perhaps injuries to treat, certainly, hearts and minds to change, gradually. But also love to nurture, hope to tend, and a future to build with a man who'd learned to dance. The water was flowing again in Dry Mercy, and not just in the wells. Part 8. Seeds on the Desert. The late spring snow melted slowly from the Wyoming hills, feeding the streams that had run dry for too long. Elias' heart stood beside his new well, watching the aspen sapling's leaves tremble in the morning breeze. 6 months had passed since Mallory's fall, and the tree had taken root, growing stronger than anyone expected. "The water table's rising," Little Crow observed, checking the depth marker they'd installed. 4 feet higher than last year. The railroad kept their word about the upstream dams. Elias replied, "Miracle of miracles." Miracles backed by federal warrants tend to be more reliable. Little Crow smiled. "Marshal Thompson sends his regards, by the way, and a warning." Elias raised an eyebrow. Colt Mallory had brothers, one in Kansas, one in California. Word is they're asking questions about his death. "Let them ask." Elias touched the handle of the pistol he still wore. Some habits died hard on the frontier. Dry Mercy's not the same easy target it was. And it wasn't. The Dry Mercy Water and Medical Station had become a landmark on the railway route. What started as Marisol's clinic had expanded into a proper way station, offering clean water, basic medical care, and supplies to travelers. The cooperative model had worked so well that other towns were sending representatives to learn. "Rider coming," Little Crow noted, shading his eyes. "Looks like Doc Vega." Elias's heart lifted as it always did when he saw her. Marisol had been called to examine a body at a homestead 2 days' ride away. Her duties as territorial examiner took her far afield. She rode with confidence now. No longer the uncertain traveler who'd arrived with a wagon train. "Miss me?" she asked, dismounting with practiced ease. Always. He helped her with her medical bag, noting new lines of fatigue around her eyes. Rough case. Settler family, killed over water rights, made it look like Indian raids, but the evidence said otherwise. She sighed. I'm getting too good at reading violence. They walked together toward the station, where construction was underway for a new wing. The Chinese families had proven gifted builders, their techniques for working with limited materials invaluable in the harsh climate. And any word from Mateo? Elias asked. A letter. He's in Colorado now, working with the Pinkertons to root out what's left of Mallory's network. Pride and worry mixed in her voice. He's found his redemption, but at what cost? Inside the station, controlled chaos reigned. Misses. Lou directed the kitchen with multilingual efficiency, while old Ruthie managed the books with an iron hand. The Garrett boy, fully recovered, was teaching Spanish children to read English while learning Spanish in return. Dr. Vega. A young Mexican woman rushed forward. My daughter. The fever broke the willow bark tea, just like you taught me. Marisol smiled, the fatigue lifting from her face. Good, keep her resting. Lots of clean water. And Maria, you did well. You're becoming a fine healer. This was her other project, training local women in basic medicine. With frontier doctors scarce, empowering communities to handle simple ailments saved lives. Several of her students had already set up their own practices in surrounding settlements. That evening, the station hosted its weekly community dinner. Tables groaned under dishes from a dozen traditions, Ruthie's cornbread next to Mrs. Liu's dumplings, Mexican beans beside Irish stew. Families who'd once glared across cultural divides now passed salt and shared recipes. Crawford sat alone at the end of one table, his presence both surprising and telling. His wife sat with the other women, pointedly distant. The man's empire had crumbled as his workers found better opportunities at the cooperative. Pride kept him stubborn, but economics were forcing change. He'll come around, Sheriff Hale said, joining Elias and Marisol. His wife's already talking about selling, moving somewhere they can start fresh. Running from shame rather than facing it, Marisol observed. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for. Hale replied, not everyone's strong enough for redemption. After dinner, Elias found himself in the cemetery with Marisol, their evening ritual now shared by others. Families tended graves together, the space becoming a garden of memory rather than a field of sorrow. The white crosses mixed with Chinese markers and Mexican flowers, creating something uniquely American in its diversity. I've been thinking, Marisol said, kneeling to plant marigolds by a child's grave. About us, about the future. Elias waited, knowing she'd find her words. I want children, she said simply. Not to replace what you lost, but to build something new. Would that be? Yes. The word came out rougher than intended. God, yes. I thought I'd never want that again, but with you. He knelt beside her. Marisol Vega, will you marry me not someday, but soon? She turned to him, dirt on her hands and tears in her eyes. Elias Hart, I thought you'd never ask properly. Is that a yes? That's a yes. They kissed there among the graves and growing things, life asserting itself over death. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, officiated by 3 religious leaders to accommodate the town's diversity. Marisol wore her mother's dress, altered by the Chinese seamstresses. Elias stood in his one good suit, Little Crow beside him as best man. If someone had told me a year ago I'd be standing here, Sheriff Hale muttered, watching Catholics, Protestants, and Buddhists share the same celebration, I'd have called them mad. Mad world needs mad dreams, Nora Quinn replied, raising her glass. To the bride and groom may they be as stubborn in love as they are in everything else. The celebration lasted well into the night. Musicians played, children ran wild. And for a few hours, Dry Mercy forgot its struggles. Even Crawford's wife danced, her husband notably absent, but his absence perhaps its own gift. Later, in the quiet of their new shared home behind the station, Elias and Marisol lay entwined, watching stars through the window. "No regrets?" she asked. "None, you—" "Only that it took so long to find you." She traced the scar on his shoulder, a reminder of their flight from Red Gulch. "We've come far from that day. Further to go yet. Together. Always together." Months passed. The station grew, becoming not just a waypoint but a destination. Traveling doctors stopped to learn Marisol's techniques. Agricultural experts came to study the cooperative farming methods. Even a photographer arrived, documenting the miracle of dry mercy for Eastern newspapers. The photograph he took became famous. The entire town gathered in front of the station. Faces of every shade and origin, united not by blood, but by choice. At the center stood Elias and Marisol, her hand resting on her visibly pregnant belly, his arm protective around her shoulders. "We're becoming a symbol," Marisol said, studying the image. "Is that good or dangerous?" "Both," Elias admitted. "But symbols matter. Other towns see what's possible here." Their daughter was born as the aspens turned gold, her cries strong and clear. They named her Elena Margaret Hart, honoring both heritages and memories. Old Ruthie served as midwife, with Mrs. Lou and Maria assisting, a frontier birth attended by the world. "She's perfect," Marisol whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Like her mother," Elias said, touching his daughter's tiny fingers in wonder. Second chances, he thought. Sometimes life really did offer them. The news from outside remained troubling. Mallory's brothers were stirring trouble in other territories, using their martyred brother as a rallying cry for traditional order. But federal pressure and local resistance were proving effective. The old ways were dying, sometimes violently, but inevitably. "Letter for you, Doc," someone called. Marisol read it, her face cycling through emotions. "It's from Mateo. He's getting married to an Irish girl in Denver, asking if I'll come witness." "We'll go," Elias said immediately. "All of us, show Elena the world beyond dry mercy." "It's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous, but hiding isn't living." He smiled. "Besides, I want to meet the woman who tamed your wild brother." Winter came early that year, but the station stayed warm. The cooperative had laid in supplies. The water system was protected from freezing, and the clinic was stocked with medicines. When blizzards trapped travelers, there was room and food for all. On the longest night, they held a festival of lights, Chinese lanterns, Mexican luminarias, American candles. The cemetery glowed with remembrance while the station blazed with hope. "Sst, look at that," Little Crow said, pointing to children playing Crawford's grandson teaching a Chinese girl to throw snowballs. "The real victory isn't in laws or elections. It's in them." Crawford himself stood at the edge of the celebration, a donation of firewood, his unspoken peace offering. His wife stood with the other women, no longer looking back. Some people changed, others just learned to coexist. Both were victories of a sort. As spring returned, so did the railroad representatives. But this time they came as partners, proposing to make Dry Mercy an official refreshment stop, bringing prosperity along with responsibility. "We accept," the town council voted, "on our terms." And their terms held. The station expanded again, adding guest rooms and a school. Marisol's medical training program received territorial funding. Elias's water management system became a model for drought-prone regions. One morning, as Elias taught Elena to feed the chickens while Marisol tended patients, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Mateo Vega, no longer the frightened boy who'd fled in darkness, but a man who'd found his path. "Sister," he said simply, embracing Marisol. "I've come home. To stay. To help. The Pinkertons taught me investigation. Thought Sheriff Hale could use a deputy who knows how to read more than just tracks." And so the circle expanded again. The boy who'd almost helped destroy the town now worked to protect it. Redemption earned through action, not just words. Years would pass. The photograph of Dry Mercy would inspire other communities. Elena would grow up trilingual, as comfortable in the Chinese quarter as the Mexican district or the Anglo ranches. Elias would find gray in his beard and peace in his heart. Marisol would train a generation of healers who saw no color but the red of blood that flowed the same in everyone. But that was the future. For now, on this spring morning with the aspens budding green and the water flowing clear, Elias' heart stood with his family and chosen community, watching the desert bloom. In the wind, there is an answer, Marisol said softly. An old prayer from her mother's people. When we dare to hold each other, trembling but gentle, the wasteland learns to flower. Amen, said Elias, and around them, in a dozen languages and traditions, the town they'd built together echoed the word. The desert had bloomed indeed, and in Dry Mercy. Water flowed not just from wells, but from hearts that had learned the deepest truth of the frontier: we survive alone, but we thrive together. Thank you so much for listening to this story with me. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening at home? During your commute? Or perhaps under the stars like our characters in Old Wyoming? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to Wild West Night for more tales of courage, redemption, and love on the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these stories of the Old West. Until next time, partners.